Okay, today is Monday, July 12th, 2021, and we're here with Joe Walker, a former teacher at Richfield High School. Joe, when did you start working at Richfield High School?
Yeah, I started working at Richfield 2 years back, so 2019, fall of 2019 was my first year there, and my first full-time teaching job as well.
And what did you teach at Richfield High School?
I was a social studies teacher, but I taught several different classes within that department. AP Human Geography, AP Psychology, Intro Psychology. I taught an elective called Sports and American History, and then I also taught a Human Geography class in Spanish.
And your contract was recently terminated by Richfield High School or Richfield Public School, the Richfield Public School Board, or others would look at it as fired. For what reason?
From my understanding and all the messages that I've received, it was because I participated in a school walkout and protest that happened on April 19th, and it was a protest organized and led by students advocating for racial justice and racial equity, and one that students invited me to participate in, invited me into that space, and made it clear that it'd be very meaningful to them to have support from staff. And they they wanted my support, and they invited me in, and after being invited in, that's when I decided to participate.
So it's also important to point out that April 19th is 8 days after Brooklyn Center Police shot and killed black man Dante Wright, which was on April 11th. Was that part of the impetus of the walkout on April 18th?
Yes, it was. From my understanding, it wasn't something that they designated specifically, but that certainly was, I think, an impetus, like you say, or sort of a spark behind it, among with every other instance of racial injustice.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's not just one. I mean, there's so much that's happened here and so much that's been happening here. And so they invite you to this walkout. You go to the walkout. What was the walkout like? Was there a lot of students there? Was it mostly black students? Was there mostly white students? What was the, if you can take people into the picture of what happened, what was it like?
Sure. It was honestly really, really incredible. It was really impressive. I would say that the majority of participants were BIPOC, but there was a good mix of students from all sorts of backgrounds that participated. And beforehand, students had done a very good, or put in a lot of effort into sort of making it public and encouraging participation. I know they had taken the steps necessary as far as communication with administration about it and everything along those lines.
So administration knew this was going to happen?
Yeah, okay. Yes, they did well in advance, and they actually, the weekend prior, had sent out an email entitled Student Right to Protest that emphasized respect for free speech rights, First Amendment rights.
Okay.
And made it clear that it would be acceptable. Yeah.
Okay, and so were there any other teachers in the walkout along with you? Not to incriminate anybody, but you were the only staff member?
I was, correct.
Okay, so when you do this walkout, the kids just left school and had a rally around, or like a march, or what happened?
Yeah, so there was a designated time right before third period started, and students sort of gathered out in front of the school at first. And it was really quite powerful to witness because I had a prep period previous, so I was out there a little early, and so I saw the first couple students come out, and they were kind of trickling out, and then a few minutes later there was just this mass of students that had gathered and that were clearly very very motivated and felt very strongly about what they were doing. And then, so we gathered outside of the school and then marched and chanted and walked to the Richfield Municipal Building, which houses the police department.
Ah, okay.
Right. And then just sort of gathered there right out in front of the police department. Students took turns speaking, sharing and talking, sort of sharing their thoughts and feelings and stories.
Yeah.
There were other community members that joined in over the course of the march.
Well, of course. I mean, it's in the city of so people are out.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And actually, my fiance, she's incredible. She's been someone who's been a very, very, very strong supporter and voice and leader in the movement for racial justice. And I, being a white man, I wouldn't necessarily have developed the perspectives that I have, or at least in the time that I have without her. And so it's not something that just comes out of nowhere. It's a lot of
So she was participating in the march as well?
Yeah, so she did. She actually took the day off from work, and she and another one of our friends went and picked up pizza and like Gatorade and stuff like that for the kids. So after the protest, before they walked back, she was there. And her friend was there as well, and providing pizza and stuff like that for kids.
So now the march ends. April 19th comes around. I'm assuming that's like a Tuesday or Wednesday. When do you start to notice that the school board may be onto you, or not onto you, but that the school board may be looking to terminate your contract?
Yeah, I would say, like, as far as feeling, it was pretty immediate, not necessarily from the school board, but just in the way that I saw colleagues and the principal and assistant principal and other staff members interacting with me. It was a very distinct and drastic change in how it went from positive, sort of normal, cordial, everyday interactions to almost like a silent treatment of sorts.
Yeah, there's no seat at the break room table for you.
Right, exactly. Not that I was necessarily sitting there. But
I get it.
And I had some colleagues as well. Some colleagues were, very interested in hearing about what I did and why I did it. Some colleagues were very supportive. Yeah. But I also had several colleagues that were, either how they treated me was very different afterwards, or I got quite a few lectures also from other colleagues, lectures about what I did wrong and what I should have done, and working within a system and things along those lines. So,
well, is there anything? I'm assuming that there's something that they found contractual in your contract that says, hey, you can't be walking out with students and attending marches. Like, was there anything in the contract that said, hey, you can't do this?
Not explicitly that I saw from my reading of the contract. I know that ultimately their reasoning was because I hadn't coded my time correctly, my time card.
What does coding your time mean?
Well,
because we saw this in the video that we just put out today. It said, he didn't code his time or something to that extent.
That's a good question. I wish I knew, because we don't code our time. The only time or only instance in which that comes up is if we are requesting a substitute for some reason, typically, or requesting personal leave. But even then, it's not no data entry into a time card. It's basically a system where we request a sub, we can send a message to the sub about it, and then we enter it. So there's no coding whatsoever that goes into it.
Okay, so people are going to be watching this across the country, probably the world. Bring us into Richfield High School. I grew up in Richfield for a split second in 1986. I was 4 years old, moved here when my mother moved my sister and I here from New Orleans. So I was here for a split second, and we lived with my grandmother and grandfather in Richfield, not too far from Richfield High School. But bring me into Richfield 2021. Like, what is the high school makeup ethnically? Like what is the racial makeup of the school?
Yeah, so certainly the majority of the student population are BIPOC. The Latinx student population is the highest percentage-wise, I believe.
Wait. The majority of Richfield High School is non-white.
Correct.
Okay. What is the? Okay, so then, how many? What percentage would you say is white?
I just recently looked at reports from the Department of Education, Richfield's school report card from MDE, and I believe it's somewhere in the 25 to 27% range.
Wow, that's a lot lower than I would have thought it would have been. But and the staff makeup. What is the staff makeup at Richfield?
Overwhelmingly white. I think as far
95, 99, 90%?
I think it's like 95, 96% as far as
Okay.
teachers and administrators go. Yes.
Okay, so we're at a time where, I mean, and obviously police brutality, modern day lynchings, this stuff has been going on for some time. Well, since the inception of the country, and right now people are in kind of in the heat of it. I mean, we're coming out of what some would say an uprising, and the city, emotionally is still on fire, and these kids want to go out and do a march to recognize that, and the staff then shunned you for participating in that. My question is, how had the staff dealt with racial inequity and disparity up until that point? Because if you got a mostly non-white student base, mostly BIPOC student base, and almost overwhelmingly white staff base, is there some tension that was already going on beforehand? Or this couldn't have just been like, oh, we now have problems because, Mr. Walker's going out with the march. What was going on before that?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the short answer from what I've seen, what I've heard, and then also what I've gathered just from listening to my students about what staff does to address these issues is they don't.
Okay.
They don't. And that was something that students had voiced to me, many times, was a lack of space, really, a lack of space to be able to address these issues because staff didn't really want to touch them. And it might, be oh, this happened in the news, right? Just so we're all aware. Or it might be, a mass email with going out to everybody on the district mailing list about, just so you're aware, this is what happened, and these are the talking points that you should give to support students. But something that, knowing that, and again, coming from listening to my students and learning from my students, something that I tried to be intentional about in my instruction was trying to open up that space in my classroom. Something that I would do often was to actually step right outside of the classroom, right outside of the door, so I was still monitoring students, but saying, this is your space. And I always emphasize that. This is your space, this is your classroom. I'm just here as a guide and as an advisor. But actually stepping out, because I know that my presence in that space censors, censors students as a white man, certainly, and then doubly as an authority figure of sorts, as a teacher. So we would do that often, where when something would come up, particularly involving racial injustice or inequity or police violence against BIPOC folks, particularly Black folks. I would open up that space for students, try and remove myself from that space so they could have an open and honest conversation with each other, and then after a certain amount of time, would check in with them and say, do you want to invite me back into this space, or do you need more time?
Words I've never heard from a white teacher. I've had white educators, coming up that have given up provided the space in different ways, but I've never heard of that. of that method before. So you say, hey, can I be invited back into the space?
Right.
Okay.
Because I think, particularly when discussing and addressing these sorts of issues, that's something that I should be invited into. It's something that students should take the lead on, right? Should be able to lead, should feel safe and secure and supported in those sorts of conversations. And I'm going to participate, or I'm going to enter that space only to the extent that students want me to be there.
Now, did you come up with that method yourself, or did somebody teach you how to do that?
I came up with it myself, actually.
Okay. You didn't learn it from anywhere else, okay.
No, I didn't. I think it just came from, thinking a lot about, and thinking myself, but also conversations, listening, learning from students, from, other BIPOC folks, and from my fiance and others is just thinking about how much space white people take up. Particularly white men. And so kind of looking at it as a geography teacher, I think in spatial terms a lot. So thinking about how much space am I taking up and whose space am I taking away? And then really reflecting on that and thinking about how I can teach in a way that doesn't take away space, but rather provide space for students. Because why are we all there? Why is anybody in education? Well, I guess I can't answer for everybody, but I feel and I like to believe that most people in education are there for students, for kids, and so that comes with a responsibility to, in my mind, to give students that space, give students the opportunity to shape their own education rather than having it dictated to them.
So have you ever had to have conversations with other white constituents? Hey man, this is how to not take up the space, or whoa, what you said is really incredulously racist. Like, have you ever had to check somebody coming out of pocket, like, hey, don't say that?
Yeah, absolutely, I have.
What's the result of that?
Typically, some manifestation of white fragility is usually what
some
comes
manifestation,
of it. Right?
Many manifestations. I mean, and a lot of these teachers are at Richfield. I mean, have been there for a minute, right?
Yeah. Many have been there for years, and so in those instances, the reaction has been kind of, puzzling in a sense, but also not so puzzling either, because it's a typical reaction. But that ranges from immediate defensiveness to trying to explain their actions and everything along those lines. And
it almost sounds like the staff could have benefited from having a group conversation or something like that. Was the staff ever called in to have a conversation about, hey, we're 90% white, and there's black men out here being shot and killed by police in an extremely overt fashion. They're not even trying to sweep it under the rug at all. I mean, this racism is overt at this point. We should talk about this.
Not that I know of, and if there was, I wasn't invited or present for those conversations. A lot of what that consists of is sort of, I guess I would call it lip service, right?
Yeah.
To be frank, where it's a lot of, okay, this is what you're supposed to say in these instances. This is what we're going to say.
Yeah.
But we're just going to keep it moving. We got lessons to get to. We've got tests to prepare for and everything like that. And so we'll take a designated amount of time to have this conversation, and then we're moving on from it. So no, not really that I am aware of or that I know of. Those sorts of conversations.
So then we're going to expand in this world just one more time here to give people some context. So I think it was, and you can tell me the month. We won't name names on the educator that said this, but the Derek Chauvin conviction was coming up, if he was going to get charged or not, and if he was going to be found guilty or not. And some students at Richfield High School were saying, this is, I'm assuming in April, were saying, hey, we're going to go to this march. And a teacher inserted themselves into the conversation and said, whoever goes to that march is a bunch of hooligans and thugs, correct? What exactly was said, and how did the students react or relay that story?
Yeah, and thank you for saying that, because it is, something that was relayed to me. Obviously, I wasn't present for that incident.
Yeah,
but
and I heard one of the students tell me the story, so that's why I bring it up.
Right, but I do have a close relationship with the students involved, and so I trust what they said. And so my understanding was this group of students was having a private conversation regarding the trial of Chauvin, and a teacher, this teacher in question, sort of interjected or imposed themselves in that conversation, not one that they were invited into. And from what I remember, some of the comments were, Chauvin should be acquitted of all charges.
I didn't know that part.
Yeah, I believe that's how it started. George Floyd was a criminal and a drug user.
This teacher said this?
This is what the teacher was saying, yes.
Yes.
And that, and then it came up, or the teacher overheard that students were planning to attend a protest later that evening as part of the broader protest movement, obviously going on in Minneapolis and around the country and the world. And the teacher told them that they were hooligans and thugs for participating in that.
And this teacher has a history of saying racially charged things. So did Richfield Public Schools ever do anything about this educator?
So from what I know, and they're very quiet on many things as far as related to staffing, but from what I know, it was a pretty long and arduous process for the students to even report the incident and convince the administration to investigate it all. I mean, and it was a very, very slow process for any sort of disciplinary action to be taken against the teacher. It was a lot of conversations with administrators talking about healing and how to move forward. There were a lot of attempted justifications for why the teacher might have said that.
So you have a public school board that talks about healing, talks about justifying like verbally abusive and harmful behavior that a white educator makes towards students of color in the heat of the Derek Chauvin verdict coming down the pipe, and they just kind of kick the can down the road on it. They hear about you going out for a walkout, which was in April, and I'm assuming all this is happening kind of somewhat at the same time. April 18th, April 22nd, I believe, was when the verdict came in, or the 20th?
20th, yep.
Yeah. So this is all happening around the same time, and then you end up getting fired as a recourse as a result of you attending a rally. This white educator who says racially charged things towards BIPOC students, nothing happens to them. They're still employed as far as we're concerned, or we know of.
As far as I know, yeah.
And it's a more than 90% white staff at Richfield High School, more than 70% non-white student base, BIPOC student base. What is the future of Richfield Public Schools going to be, do you believe, going forward? Like, you talk about taking up space. This is something relative to like when we look at coaches in football. I mean, you got a ton, or the majority of the athletes are black, and then all the leadership is white. Just to give like a parallel of these spaces. What happens? But this is education with kids. Like, what happens to the future of Richfield Public Schools? And just from your methodology of stepping outside of a room, let's say, they, what's his name, Stephen Unowski?
Unowski, yep.
Stephen Unowski, who is the superintendent of Richfield Public Schools. Let's say he hands it to you. He says, you know what, Joe, fine, you take it. What's the first thing that you do? Do you then just kind of relinquish, being superintendent and say, give it to a black person, I'm out of here? Like, how do you fix this situation? That seems to have such a very overt problem right now.
Yeah, no, I think that's the that's the ultimate question, and should be, I think, the focus of educators everywhere. And I don't pretend to have all of the answers or just speak from any sort of position of authority, but just within what I've tried to do as a teacher, as an educator, is to the first step in stepping back and giving space is to silence yourself to an extent, meaning that rather than having your voice take up so much space, it's important to step back, listen, and learn. Right, because that's what we're asking our students to do, is listen and learn in school. But if we're not willing to do the same, then that's not really a fair bargain. That's not a fair situation to put students in. And I think especially for white educators, I think it's very important to step back, listen, learn from your students. Practice doing that. Practice, taking yourself off of a pedestal, so to speak, and trying to meet students on their level rather than trying to maintain this sort of hierarchical position of authority. So I think that's ultimately the first step is to listen and to learn from students, because students are well aware of what they need, and they will tell you what they need if given the chance, right? So that's the first step, is to give students the chance to share their thoughts, share their feelings, tell you what they need, and to learn from students, right? It's not just a one-way flow, where students are just supposed to sit there and learn from us. No, we need to listen and learn from our students as well. And so after doing that, right, then that's where you enter the conversation of, well, what can be done, what should be done, but maintaining the priority of meeting students' needs. Meeting students' needs.
Is there any outreach for black educators at Richfield High School?
Not that I know of. No, not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Again, the staff, especially the teaching staff, is overwhelmingly white, so I don't think that's something that the district has prioritized or would prioritize.
Well, it doesn't look like they prioritize it if most of the staff is overwhelmingly white. How many of those teachers do you believe are tenured?
Ooh, at Richfield, my guess would be majority, maybe up to 75. That's just a shot in the dark, but I would say maybe 75%. So
then you have a lot of white teachers that can't really be moved, even if something heinous is said, racially heinous, like in a situation. So it's almost, what we're looking at is an institution that has not only defended racism within its own walls, but also criminalized anti-racism. If you're going to participate in a march, and then also saying, economically, we can't take these people out. And we talk about harassment on all levels, and in a lot of contracts, there's no clause for racial harassment. What happens when that happens? What happens when an educator racially harasses a student? And it'd be interesting to see, what would happen to teachers if that were to happen, if you were to get that in a union contract or something. So to kind of wrap up, what is the next move for you, and what do you believe as a white person is kind of the place to position yourself going forward?
Yeah. Well, and And before I answer that question, one thing that I just thought of when you were talking about contracts and racial harassment, interestingly enough, the one thing that the district has touted is that it's its development and passage approval of a equity policy. Just this over the course of this past year, I believe I have read through the equity policy and checked on what they were saying and what they weren't saying, but I believe that the policy was officially approved and enacted on the same day as the student walkout and protest, April 19th.
Wow.
And the day previous to the decision in the Chauvin trial. But to answer your other question,
that doesn't feel like a coincidence.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. And I don't know, if there were other things at play or if it's just cruel irony, but that really struck me. But for me, as far as what the future holds, I haven't made any decisions specifically related to that. This all happened, or at least the official termination of my contract was just a couple of weeks ago. So I've been trying to sort of start to figure that out. But I know I want to stay in education. I love it. It's my passion. I want to do it for the rest of my life. And I honestly, despite everything, I would have loved to remain at Richfield for the students, because I love those students and have a relationship with them where there's trust and communication established there, and they understand that that's a safe and supportive space for them. But I've been mulling over a few things. I've had people reach out to me from other districts in the metro area, knowing about this incident and encouraging me to apply. I've talked to a few people and considering maybe going into an rather than a public school or a mainstream public school, maybe looking into alternative education setting.
Yeah.
But I don't know for sure. I know, like I said, I know I want to stay in education. I know I want to continue to teach and learn. But as far as where that is in the future, that's still to be determined.
One thing, like just the last note, I'm thinking to myself, like hypothetically, like if a black teacher had walked out with the students, I wonder what they would have done then. Like what is to the extent of what they can do and can't do. And just the whole idea of optics, because we had a camera in the room when I forget the gentleman at the end. Who's the guy at the end? It wasn't Steven. It was some other white guy that was basically speaking with a black woman that was part of the protest, and he kept saying, this is a very tricky situation, and he didn't code his time, and there were other people in that march, like optically, and then somebody asked him from the door, said, "Hey, don't say anything else." Like there was a clear concern for the language and how much was being revealed, and I'm curious, like. A lot of schools, I mean, they worry about optics. Like, what would have happened if they would have fired a black teacher for marching with students versus a white teacher? And also, will they replace your position with a black teacher, or is it going to be more the same old, or what the future is going to be for that? So
right. No, that's that's a good question, and I know that there were BIPOC staff that are, very supportive of students, and there was a desire amongst other staff members to participate, but from the staff that I was in conversation with, that kind of fell off. Particularly when the teachers union had said at 10 o'clock the night before the protest on a Sunday night, had advised staff not to participate.
Were you part of the union?
I was a union member.
Okay.
Yep.
How powerful would that have been for the union to be like, hey, let's go do it? I mean, even if it's against contract, it's like a point of humanity.
Right.
It's like literally this what Dante was 20, 21, early 20s, just shot point blank. The video had come out a few days later. There's people sobbing in the streets. Like I was with one of my friends who's, he's a 40-something-year-old man, and he's just sobbing. I mean, the video was grotesque, and you're not even gonna participate with students in making this historical move to walk out and stand against police violence. I mean, it was asinine. Do you think it was an opportunity for the union to like stand up and say something like, yeah, we can do this?
Yeah, I think the union certainly, and just the staff collectively, the school collectively, administrators, yeah, absolutely, it was an opportunity for that. But these administrators, the union, to a certain extent, though they're supposed to advocate for teachers and for educators and for union members, they're all still ingrained in the same system, and the union administration, staff to a certain extent, have a vested interest in simply maintenance of the system, right? Not necessarily overall progress or improvement, right?
Yeah.
But keeping the system running, the system of education running, and so. And another aspect is, again, with administrators, educators, so many people involved in positions of authority within these systems being white, it's something that may be very inconsequential to them, meaning that they may read about it, they may try and figure out information about it, they may have conversations about it, but at the end of the day, they're still existing in whiteness and within the realm of white privilege, and so it's something that maybe these teachers, like I said, or educators or whoever, they can have a conversation about it, they can bring it up, they can address it, but then they can move on, because it's something that doesn't impact them or threaten them in the same way as it does people who are outside of that sort of protective realm of whiteness and white privilege. And so I think that's an excellent question for humanity, for BIPOC folks, for our students, especially our students being a majority BIPOC. For humanity, for the best interest of the students, of the community, of people in general, what should be done? Well, I think we all know what that answer is, but there's not the same sense of urgency, right?
No. I mean, for a lot of white spaces, it could even come off as urgency, but it's at the end of the day, it's not urgency. And so as things go forward, you talk about giving up space. This is also a case of, being employed and taking up a job is taking up space. And so hopefully, maybe down the line, this is, the ultimate kind of question. Would white folks be willing to give up their jobs to give up space for equity? Economically, would you be willing to vacate that space that upholds your economic status to bring in not only black educators that would take that economic space, but also be able to eliminate Richfield being a white space, or Richfield staff being a white space, or the union being a white space. So that'll be interesting to keep look and keep a watch on it going forward. But we appreciate your time and energy and spirit coming out here today, and wish you the best going forward with whatever you choose to do. And you're always welcome back here. Absolutely. To sit and chop it up. If you've got other educators you want to have a roundtable discussion with, and bring folks in, and we can talk about, even have a conversation about white educators and predominantly predominantly BIPOC student base classroom. That'd be interesting to have.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate you taking the time and having this conversation with me. It means a lot. I know it means a lot to the students, to the kids. So I appreciate that. And I guess if I could say one more thing on what you just mentioned. I guess I can't speak for other white educators, but for me, absolutely. I've had that conversation actually with people, with my fiance, and I think that's important for us to do.
Oh, yeah.
And again, like with the privilege, the accumulated privilege that I have as a white man, I would be okay economically if I were to give up that space. So. That's something that I've considered as well. Or perhaps moving to a more white space for if I want to continue as an educator. But
there's many more white spaces in Minnesota. Joe.
Right? No, I know.
I couldn't hold that one back. I was like, brother, you got your pick of the litter.
Oh, man. I know. I grew up in central Minnesota. That's a very white space. But
yes.
But yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's important for us, for white educators to consider. And I'm not the best person. I wasn't the best person certainly to do what I did, but no one else was, and the students asked me to and needed that. So if no one else is going to, or if no one else has the opportunity to do it, then
and in the sense you had the privilege to do it.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
That's what I mean.
That as well.
Right.
Okay, so Joe, you have a few statements from the school that are on email that are contradictory to what happened. What are some of the statements that they sent you?
Yeah, absolutely. So there was a message from RPS leadership that was sent out on April 16th, so the Friday before the protest on Monday the 19th. So RPS leadership, I believe it was signed by school board members, superintendent, assistant superintendent, administrators at the schools in the district. So the email that was sent out opened with, throughout history, there have been times of increased struggle and heartache in the fight for social justice. The civil rights movement is not a chapter in history class, it is here and now. And then it continued a little later on in the message. As educators, it is our job to support and empower our students through these challenging times, to uplift them, to believe in them, and to give them the tools they need to face the world as it is, and to join us in the fight to make it a better place. As a district, we will stand with our students and staff as they work for change.
Unless you go marching with your students.
Well.
So they wrote that on a Friday, and then they wrote that on they wrote that on the 16th. The 18th you do the walkout.
19th.
The 19th you do the walkout.
Yep.
And then, but how does that, just for people that I get that are just watching this now, you were then let go after you went on a walkout with students as a teacher. You were fired. Did you ever mention that to them? But hey, you said this on the 16th. What did they say back?
Yeah, nothing actually. I drafted a letter prior to participating in the walkout and delivered it to the administrators within the building, sort of explaining what I was planning to do. I took steps as far as finding a substitute for my students during that period, for making sure they had a space. There was a teacher that had a prep period then, so I was, they volunteered.
You were just abandoning the classroom?
No, and the teacher took attendance, and they had a seating chart that was in compliance with COVID protocol and everything. But in that letter that I drafted and delivered to administration, I quoted a few of these messages.
You literally said that, for all of Richfield Public Schools, and then you went and fired me for walking out for a Black Lives Matter march. So that that whole email goes, into the bonfire, because that doesn't mean anything at that point.
Right, and there was a lot of similar language in the equity policy that the district has been very vocal about, that being something important that they've done as far as racial effort at recognizing racial justice. It was a lot of the same language, and again, that policy was passed on the same day as the walkout. So,
okay.
It's just
lip service.
Lip service, right? Performative or cosmetic sort of allyship.
So let's get into the timeline really quick of when they decided to terminate your contract.
Right.
So the 28th is when they had the meeting, and that's when we filmed the meeting with the Richfield Public School Board.
Right.
Now, when did they say, hey, we're going to talk about this?
Yeah, so I, on the 25th of June, so the Friday before the meeting on Monday the 28th, I got a call from the Human Resources Department letting me know that the decision about my contract would be on the agenda for the board meeting on the 28th.
Because
Monday.
you had walked out with the students for a Black Lives Matter march.
That was never specified. In fact, the district administration, they didn't communicate with me at all, even though I attempted to communicate with them, throughout the process from the march and thereon.
So they never mentioned you going out in the march at all?
No, and they never. They technically, because I was a probationary teacher, not tenured, they can decide not to renew my contract without reasoning, without a justification or explanation. So there was never really any communication whatsoever from school board, superintendent, admin, or anything like that in sort of the weeks leading up to the school board meeting. Except on the 25th, I got that call.
Yeah. Said, hey, we're going to bring you in and talk to you about this. Talk to you about something.
Well, that's what they. And it wasn't even that. All they said was it would be on the agenda for the board meeting.
Okay.
But they didn't say why.
Okay.
And immediately after I received that call, my school email account was deleted, or I lost access to it, and I also lost access to the Schoology account, which is our online learning platform.
Okay.
So, I mean, one, I had, not knowing what would happen, I had saved basically all of my digital curriculum to an external hard drive, but had I not done that, because I lost access to my email account, I also lost access to my Google Drive account, so I would have lost that.
All of that year's work would have been gone.
Right. And then
so the Richfield Public School Board had already made up their mind by that point, it sounds like.
It was pretty clear. They didn't say that officially, but I found out that they had officially actually the day after the school board meeting, the 29th, when I received a letter informing me that that my contract would not be renewed. Again, not without explanation. The letter, though, was dated June 25th. 2021. So
I don't mean to laugh about that, but that's ridiculous.
It is.
Hey, we're going to talk about this thing that we already decided.
Right.
I mean, that is really that's I don't like that. I don't like that. But the idea is so that they had dated the letter, and so was it a unanimous decision?
Yes. Yeah, it was a unanimous decision by the school board.
That's also good to know as well. The entire school board was like, yeah, he's out. He went, on this Black Lives Matter march a week after Dante Wright was killed by cops, and he's got to go.
Right.
Well, have you had any conversations with anybody in the public school board since?
No,
Okay.
I haven't. Again, I've throughout this process made attempts to reach out to, administrators, board members, other staff, that sort of thing, and it's been radio silence. And one thing about the meeting too, and kind of how they made their decision before they officially made their decision was, it wasn't even in my mind about me or my job. Of course, I would have loved to stay at Richfield, but I knew there was always, a chance or a possibility that I would lose my job doing this. And so I know, one of the narratives that have been presented by people is that, it's sort of the white savior complex. And, this teacher is just trying to save their job. But it was never about that. I always knew that, my job would potentially be on the line. It's always been about the students, BIPOC students at Richfield in particular, making it very clear what they need from staff, what they need from people, that they're not getting it, and then asking for someone to provide that for them.
Well, I mean, don't get it twisted. I'm not, and when I think about this story, I don't sit here and say, oh, poor Joe. I think more so, that's a cold ass system. That was cold. Like in the boardroom meeting, it was like, it wasn't even about the job. It was about the excommunication and, dissociation with anything that might hold a white space accountable. It's like, this has to get eradicated. We got to cut this out. And so that's the thing that more so blew me away. Yeah, as you said earlier, you're gonna be able to find another job. You got some paint on your forearm.
Right.
Now,
summer job.
You got some hourly pay.
Yeah.
But the idea is that it's more so the system defending itself, and then replicating. That's what's really disturbing.
Yeah.
And is that gonna? And that it's. I mean, if I got my kid out in Richfield, I don't know how I feel about that.
Yeah.
I don't know how I feel about my kid, my black kid going into a space that's like not only a white space, but protecting whiteness and eradicating anti-racism. Like that's wild. I mean, that's what it boils down to. And so they already made up their mind before you went in. And did you know that going into it?
I didn't. I mean, I had my suspicions based on that call and then losing access to those accounts, but I didn't know that. But yeah, one thing, along those lines is they had already made up their mind clearly, but there was still sort of this performative of a democratic process that school districts are supposedly supposed to take into account public opinion and public district or public interests. And so the fact that they presented the school board meeting as a forum of sorts, as an opportunity for students and community members and folks to be present and sort of make their voice heard about what they think should happen in this situation. The fact that they sat there and listened to that, but they had already made up their mind is sort of.
It reminds me of Mike Freeman, the DA of the district attorney of Hennepin County, when he came out and said there weren't going to be any charges brought to Dustin Schwartz and Mark Ringenberg, the two killer cops that had effectively murdered Jamar Clark, a black man. And he came out and he said, we're not going to levy any charges. We've gone through the system and our process, and this is the right thing to do. But they always reference the process or the democratic process that we went through, and we figured this out. And so it kind of reminds me of that. So that's really unfortunate that they had made up their mind before they brought you into their democratic process.
Yeah, absolutely, and the students as well, because the students were the most vocal voices at the board meeting, and it was unfortunate. And really a powerful negative message, I think, sent to the students that
totally
right, that you can come here and speak and advocate, but at the end of the day, these decisions are you're not going to influence anything.
Well,
right.
Well, cool, man. Thanks so much for the time.
Absolutely.
Appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you.